At 6 a.m., I found the envelope on my doorstep, cream cardstock, my name handwritten in cursive. I hadn't seen that handwriting in 4 years. The early morning light slanted through the blinds, casting long bars across the hardwood floor. I stood there barefoot, cradling a mug of coffee in one hand, and that damned envelope in the other, like it might explode. Vanessa's script was unmistakable. Elegant, self-assured, the kind of handwriting you'd find on place cards at a country club wedding. My thumb hesitated over the seal, the memory of another letter official typed cold, creeping in like a draft under the door. The one she'd sent not to me, but to the military tribunal. The letter that said in so many polished words that I was unfit for command, unfit to be trusted. Even now my hands shook remembering it. 4 years ago she wrote to them. Now she writes to me. I peeled open the flap with a careful slowness as if delaying the inevitable might dull the blow. Inside a square ivory invitation with rose gold foil lettering. You are cordially invited to celebrate Vanessa Shaw's 35th birthday. Elegant, lavish, hosted at the family estate in Virginia, a place I hadn't set foot in since I wore a uniform. I sank into the kitchen chair, the wood creaking under my weight. The name brought bile to my throat. Vanessa Shaw. Not Vanessa Cole. She'd taken our mother's maiden name after I was discharged after everything. A fresh start for her. A stain erased. Why now? The RSVP line stared up at me, empty and demanding. I wasn't sure what burned more, the audacity or the fact that a part of me still felt something. Still wanted to believe there was a place for me at that table in that house. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find the mail carrier walking away, his truck idling at the curb. "Have a good one, Lieutenant," he called with a friendly wave. I gave a stiff nod back, a reflex still lodged in muscle memory. Even retired, the title clung to me like a shadow. I sat back down, letting the envelope rest on the table beside a stack of unpaid bills and a VA benefits form I'd been too proud to fill out. My therapist's voice echoed from our last session. "Avoidance isn't healing, Natalie. Closure doesn't come in the mail, it comes when you show up for it." And yet, this didn't feel like closure. It felt like a trap. I hadn't seen my mother since the tribunal, hadn't heard her voice, except in the recordings I was forced to replay during the investigation. Rebecca Shaw, the esteemed matriarch, had been quick to preserve the family's image even if it meant sacrificing mine. She never visited during my discharge hearings. Never called. When Vanessa testified that I had acted recklessly, Mother simply nodded. Still, something gnawed at me, a splinter of curiosity I couldn't remove. I flipped the card over again. On the back, in Vanessa's familiar looping script, was a postscript PS. "Adam's looking forward to seeing everyone. Adam Carter, her fiancé." The name landed like a blow to the gut. I hadn't thought about him in years, hadn't allowed myself to. We'd served together during the 2015 deployment in Iraq, a bad operation in Al-Anbar. He was a lieutenant then, young, green, full of bravado. He almost died in that ambush, would have if I hadn't dragged him out myself. He called me a hero. Then I got court-martialed. He got promoted. And now, engaged to Vanessa. Did he know? Did he know what she did? I stared down at the card, wondering if his presence was a cruel coincidence or part of the game. Vanessa had never mentioned him in the letters she used to send me in the early days. Never once had she connected the dots. But Adam? He would remember me. He would have to. I got up and paced the small kitchen, staring at the peeling wallpaper, the stack of deployment photos I kept in a dusty box by the fridge. A time when everything had meant something. When honor wasn't a word that cut me in half. Maybe my therapist was right. Maybe this was my chance to walk through the fire instead of around it. But I wasn't going as Natalie the sister. I was going as Natalie Cole, who'd survived court-martial, betrayal, and exile. I would sit at that table with my head high, and I would look Vanessa in the eye. My hand moved before my doubt could catch it. I grabbed a pen. I stared at the RSVP line and signed it. Lieutenant Colonel Rhett. Natalie Cole. Attending. The Shaw estate looked exactly as I remembered: perfect hydrangeas, perfect gravel, perfectly fake smiles. Even the scent was the same, a sickly sweet blend of overgrown roses and expensive sunscreen. The valet barely looked up as he took my keys as though I was another anonymous guest. I stepped out in low heels, tailored slacks, a linen shirt that didn't scream military, but didn't shy from it either. I carried myself like I belonged, even if the thud in my chest betrayed me. It was all so familiar, so polished. The long white columns, the trimmed boxwoods lining the walkway, the flutter of champagne-colored banners. But behind that pristine facade was the battlefield of my undoing. Every public disgrace, every whispered judgment, all of it had happened beneath that painted porch. And still here I was again. I walked slowly up the steps, the sound of distant music drifting from the back garden. Someone laughed, high, sharp, rehearsed. Vanessa's laugh. A server opened the double doors, revealing a swirl of silk dresses, designer sunglasses, and two white smiles. I stepped through, and every eye seemed to land on me before darting away again, unsure of how to react. A ghost in broad daylight. Natalie Vanessa's voice rang out like a toast. She stood at the top of the patio steps, flawless in a coral sheath dress, sunglasses pushed up like a crown. Her blonde hair coiled in an elegant updo, not a strand out of place. "Oh my God," she said, descending toward me with outstretched arms. "I didn't know you were coming." A lie. A smooth, syrupy lie. I let her hug me quick, cold. She pulled back, keeping her hands on my shoulders just long enough for everyone nearby to notice. "You look so fit," she said. Her voice dipped in surprise. "I thought you were in Colorado." "Maryland," I replied evenly. "Oh, that's right," she chirped as if she hadn't known. "You're still doing the online thing? Running a gear shop?" "Yes." Her smile didn't budge, but her eyes scanned for an audience. Just behind her, our mother stood like a statue near the edge of the garden. Rebecca Shaw. Her posture was military-grade, shoulders squared, jaw firm, but her gaze slid past me like I was a waitress serving the wrong wine. "Natalie," she said, nodding once. "Mother." I gave her the same curt nod. Vanessa looped an arm through mine. "Come, you must meet some of Adam's friends." "Oh, you remember Adam." He was already walking toward us, tall and composed, dressed in a tailored navy suit. The same eyes, stormy and searching, but the boy I'd saved in a firefight was long gone. He looked like a man carved from expectation. "Natalie," he said, extending a hand. "Adam." I shook it, watching the flicker in his eyes. Recognition, confusion, something else. Vanessa leaned in between us. "Adam, Natalie, and I go way back, obviously. But don't worry, she won't bite. She's practically a civilian now." He smiled politely, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't realize." "Time flies," Vanessa said, already tugging me along. We moved through the party, exchanging small talk and stares. Every conversation brushed up against something deeper, but never broke the surface. No one mentioned Iraq. No one mentioned my discharge. No one asked where I'd been these past 4 years. I watched my sister hold court, shaking hands, making jokes, praising herself in third person. The birthday queen. Even the cake had her initials in gold leaf. Later, just before the toast, she took the microphone. "I want to thank everyone for coming," she said, standing beneath the pergola framed by lanterns and hydrangeas. "Family means everything to me. Loyalty, sacrifice, shared values. These are what we Shaw women stand for." I stiffened. Across the lawn, Rebecca glanced my way, her face unreadable. The guests smiled politely, sipping champagne. And of course, Vanessa added, grinning, "It's so special to have my big sister here today. She used to think she was a soldier. Now she sells tactical pens online. Isn't that adorable?" Laughter scattered like dry leaves. Rebecca gave a slow blink of approval. Even the servers chuckled. Except Adam. I looked at him. He wasn't laughing. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for a glass of champagne. His eyes never left me. Then the glass slipped from his fingers and shattered on the flagstone. Wait. Your name's Natalie Cole, he asked, pale. After the laughter died, all I could hear was the wind rustling the trees and Adam's breath catching. For a moment the party dimmed around us. The clinking glasses, the shallow congratulations, the synthetic joy, all of it blurred, as Adam looked at me like I was a ghost, clawing back from the past. His champagne glass lay shattered at his feet, and his fingers trembled faintly at his sides. Natalie Cole, he repeated quieter this time. From he paused. Operation Dust Veil, Fob Falcon, the convoy ambush. My chest tightened. That name, that place pulled me back like gravity. I nodded once. I thought you died, he said. His voice had dropped raw and stunned. They said the chopper didn't make it. That you were beyond help. I didn't die. My voice was even almost hollow. But you're not wrong about the chopper. It crashed. I spent 6 months recovering in Germany before they decided I wasn't fit for command anymore. He looked at me, searching my face as though trying to reconcile the clean-cut woman in linen with the blood-soaked officer from that day in the desert. You saved my life, he said. I looked away. That was my job. No. You dragged me out of that vehicle when it was burning. I remember your voice in my ear yelling at me to stay awake. And then you were gone. I was extracted separately, I said. Internal injuries. They never told you I survived. He shook his head, still stunned. No. They gave us a briefing afterward, said your actions were reckless, that your orders had put the squad at risk. That you had mental health issues, that you'd ignored protocol. There it was. The poison I'd lived with for years delivered back to me in the voice of a man who had once believed in the system. I was court-martialed, I said quietly. Not dishonorably discharged, but close enough. Enough that no one wanted me anymore, not the army, not my own family. We stood beneath a canopy of dogwoods at the edge of the garden where the buzz of conversation was distant. The fairy lights along the hedges flickered like they were trying to pretend everything was still beautiful. Adam stepped back, rubbing his jaw. Why would they lie? I hesitated, then tilted my head toward the party. You're engaged to someone who might know. He followed my gaze, his eyes catching on Vanessa as she held court near the poolside bar, her laughter slicing the air. Vanessa. I let the silence speak. He took a step closer. But why would she? I was supposed to testify, I interrupted, about procurement irregularities in our unit's supply line. It would have embarrassed some very powerful people. My CO told me to shut up. I didn't. So they shut me up instead. His face was pale. That's not possible. I looked at him. Is it? He swallowed his Adam's apple bobbing. Why didn't you ever come forward? I tried. I said, the bitterness sharper than I wanted it to be. But once the tribunal ruled, once the reports were filed, I became a liability. Even to my own mother. She told me to stop making the family look bad. From across the lawn, Rebecca's silhouette stood like a statue, untouched by the wind, the whispers or the truth. Adam exhaled hard, then stepped closer, lowering his voice. But why would Vanessa? What would she gain? I looked him straight in the eyes. Promotions, public image. She got into advanced intelligence training 2 months after I was discharged, took over my slot. Ask her about that. I had no idea. I saw it then, the crack. The first fracture in the gleaming marble they'd carved around him, the edges of doubt creeping in. Behind us, footsteps clicked sharply against the stone path. Vanessa. There you two are, she sang. People are asking where my fiancé went. She slipped between us, looping her arm through his. You okay, babe? You look off. Adam didn't answer right away. Vanessa's eyes flicked to me, cool and calculating. Just catching up, I said, voice smooth. Vanessa's smile thinned. Well, don't take too long. We've got dessert coming. And fireworks. Big finale. She tugged him back toward the patio. He didn't resist, but he kept looking at me over his shoulder. Then he stopped. He turned back, his expression changed. They told us she had mental health issues, that she endangered the unit. That's what ended her career? Wasn't it? I turned to him. What if I told you your fiancé helped make that happen? I didn't need closure. I needed proof. That thought pulsed through me like a metronome as I pulled out the heavy plastic bin from the back of my closet. The smell of old paper dust and stale resentment wafted up. Inside, redacted reports, tribunal transcripts, outdated flash drives, every remnant of a life erased. They thought they'd buried me under bureaucracy. What they didn't count on was that I kept everything. I placed the files carefully across my home office table. The space was modest second bedroom converted into a workspace, walls bare except for a single photo of my unit taken weeks before everything went to hell. My badge had been stripped, my name dragged, but fingerprints. They were everywhere. All I had to do was follow them. I booted up my old encrypted laptop, the one I hadn't touched since 2019, and logged into a backup account I created before the tribunal hearings. I scrolled through folders with names like FobComs and Tribunal Co-RR. My hands moved mechanically, but my mind burned every headline, every offhand comment, every look of pity I'd endured over the years resurfaced and condensed into purpose. When I hit the end of what I had, I leaned back, jaw clenched. There were gaps, holes I could never fill unless I got help. That's when I thought of Jared Lynn. Back in 2017, Jared was a civilian IT contractor assigned to a SIGINT division I was overseeing. A quiet guy, always chewing gum, but too smart to stay out of trouble. When someone leaked classified drone coordinates, he almost took the fall. I shielded him during the inquiry because I knew he was innocent. He swore he owed me. Maybe it was time to collect. I texted him from a burner number, need to talk. Urgent, not a trap. The reply came 3 minutes later. A location. A time. The parking garage was mostly empty, the concrete cold and echoing under the buzz of sodium lights. I parked in a corner, engine running. Jared emerged from the stairwell wearing a baseball cap and hoodie, his laptop bag slung over one shoulder. "You look like hell," he said as he slid into the passenger seat. "I've seen worse." He smirked. "Yeah, you saw mine. Can you still access military archives?" I asked, cutting straight through the pleasantries. His eyes narrowed. "That depends. You planning to go full Snowden on me? I need deleted emails. Communications between Vanessa Shaw and the tribunal, between her and Colonel Dreyfus if possible." His brows lifted. "Your sister." "Was my sister," I corrected. "Now she's just someone who buried me with a keyboard." Jared looked away, thoughtful. "I still have admin-level clearance for a few contractor nodes. Off-grid backups. Might be able to scrape fragments." I handed him a flash drive. "Format's clean. Anything you find, dump it here. I'll owe you." "You already collected on that years ago," he said quietly, but took the drive anyway. 2 nights later, we met again. This time, he didn't make me wait. He handed me the drive with a blank expression. I shouldn't have found what I found. I plugged it into my laptop as soon as I got home. The folders were dated messy, but the file names screamed cover up: Med Review Shaw v. Shaw, Hast, Kat Dreyfus, Rex, Discharge. My pulse kicked hard. I clicked open a PDF, a chain of internal memos. They detailed a recommendation for psychological reevaluation, citing erratic behavior, refusal to follow chain of command, possible PTSD. The originator, Vanessa Shaw. She'd submitted the document from an off-network device, IP registered to the family estate. The date: 2 weeks before my tribunal hearing, before I even knew I was being investigated. The next file was worse. A draft email to Colonel Dreyfus. Per our conversation, I believe, Natalie Cole's deteriorating condition makes her unfit for duty. I strongly recommend discharge before the situation escalates. It was time-stamped. It was signed. Jared had found the smoking gun. She'd sold me out with an email. No confrontation, no discussion. Just a digital shove off the cliff. I sat frozen in my chair staring at the glowing screen. My jaw ached from clenching. Outside, the street was silent. Inside, every cell in my body was screaming. She buried me with a keyboard. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, but someone else might be. The cafe was tucked between a laundromat and a bookstore that hadn't opened on time since 2015. It was the kind of place where the lights were dim and the coffee was bitter and no one asked why you brought your own file folders. Rain tapped against the window like a metronome of unease, blurring the world outside into watercolor. Grace was already there when I arrived, sitting by the far window. She looked exactly the same, blunt-cut hair, no makeup, military posture softened just enough to pass as civilian. A wool coat was draped over the back of her chair, her umbrella puddling on the floor. "You came," she said, nodding. "I almost didn't," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. "I wasn't sure you'd still want to be seen with me." Grace gave a small smile. "Shaw family exiles are a niche community. I figured I'd make time for the founding member." That almost made me laugh. Almost. Grace Lyman had been Vanessa's legal aide for 2 years before resigning for personal reasons that were whispered about but never confirmed. Back then, I didn't have the bandwidth to dig into her story. I was too busy drowning in my own. But now things were different. "You said in your message you had information," I began. She nodded slowly and pulled out a folder from her oversized bag. Before I left, I started copying things. Little things. Memos, emails, drafts that didn't match the final copies. Vanessa had a pattern edit after signatures scrub context, remove key phrases. Forgery, I asked. Manipulation, she said. And intimidation. But yes, in some cases, close enough. She opened the folder and slid a printout toward me. It was a memo to a military ethics board, a review request regarding an officer's psychological profile. The tone was clinical precise. But the next page, the earlier draft, was laced with judgmental language speculation. One called the subject erratic, potentially dangerous. The final version swapped that for demonstrate signs of field fatigue. I felt cold. "She's done this before." "She did it to me," Grace said quietly. I flagged an inconsistency in her time logs, just routine, nothing personal. Next thing I know, there's an HR report claiming I missed deadlines, fabricated timestamps. I didn't fight it. I didn't have the stomach. We sat in silence for a moment. The rain outside had turned heavier. It sounded like secrets slapping the pavement. "She always made it look like an accident," I muttered. "She weaponized credibility," Grace replied. I reached into my bag and retrieved a USB drive. "I have proof she submitted a false psychological recommendation, used a private IP, faked the sequence. I can't trace the motive yet, but it's damning." Grace's eyebrows rose. "And you haven't gone public?" "Not yet. I need more. Something she can't spin." She hesitated, then leaned closer. "I have something. A memo she killed an internal inquiry from 2016. It questioned her ethics in a procurement case. The file was wiped before the report could be completed, but I saved the metadata." That got my attention. "Why didn't you say this earlier?" "Because I was afraid. She doesn't just ruin reputations. She deletes people." My phone buzzed. I ignored it. Grace continued. "She didn't just ruin your career. She was planning to erase you entirely." There was no hyperbole in her voice, no drama, just cold, lived truth. I sat back, suddenly aware of the chill in my spine. The phone buzzed again, more insistent. I glanced down. "Adam, we need to talk. Urgently, tonight." Adam's voice cracked over the phone. Natalie, she lied to me. About everything. I had never heard him sound like that controlled, calm Adam, the man Vanessa paraded like a trophy. Now his voice trembled. I could hear it over the muffled static over my own heartbeat thudding against the walls of my ribcage. It was raining again by the time I pulled up outside his building. A sterile condo block nestled in Rosslyn, glassy and cold, like no one really lived there, just passed through between deployments and obligations. As I entered, the scent of polished wood and steel met me, and the hallway swallowed my steps. I hadn't been here in years. Back then, I was someone else. So was he. The door opened before I knocked. Adam stood there in jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, barefoot, holding a glass of something amber that sloshed dangerously close to the rim. He didn't speak, just stepped aside. I walked in. His living room looked like an exhibit, photos from Iraq, plaques, military commendations arranged like museum pieces. I scanned the walls, stopping at a framed photo. His unit. I recognized two faces. One of them was mine. "You kept that?" I asked, pointing. He nodded. "They told me to get rid of it after the report came out." "I didn't." I turned to him. And now I don't know who the hell I was listening to. He set the glass down and rubbed the back of his neck. I went through my files. I found the report from that day, the medevac logs, your discharge recommendation, everything. I waited. "There are gaps," he said. "No timestamps on the first version. Sections redacted. The file was edited, Natalie." I knew it felt off. "They said you broke protocol, that you endangered the unit, but you didn't." I met his eyes. "No, I didn't." He took a breath, then picked up a folder from the counter. Inside were copies of personnel memos, images of official headers, a blur of blacked-out lines and notes scribbled in margins. But one thing stood out: a clean memo, unsigned, labeled "Confidential" in bold. He handed it to me. Read the author line. I did. Family reported concern. Then, under that, psychological instability, recommended further evaluation prior to reinstatement. There was a name in parentheses. "Vanessa Shaw," I whispered. Adam nodded. "She submitted this as part of your post-action review," he said. "Said she had a duty to report what she'd witnessed. Claimed you were unstable, delusional, that you endangered your unit for personal glory." I stared at the paper. It felt heavier than it looked. My vision pulsed around the edges. "She wasn't even there," I said. He exhaled long and hard. I believed her. I looked up, jaw tight. "She did more than lie, Adam. She built a narrative. And you were a part of it." "I didn't know." "No. But you didn't ask either." The silence between us stretched thin. A storm hummed through the windows. Then slowly he said, "We were engaged by the time I read that file. Vanessa told me not to bring it up, that it would reopen wounds. I thought she was protecting you. She was protecting herself." He rubbed his face with both hands. "Jesus, I should have known." I studied him. Not just his expression, but the weight behind it. Regret, fear, but also something else. Resolve. "I want to help," he said. "If you'll let me." I hesitated. Trust didn't come easy anymore. Not after everything. But I nodded. He went to the cabinet and pulled out another folder. "I can get you cross-access to personnel files. Deployment rosters. Internal complaints. There might be something we missed. Who else knows? Just us." I moved toward the window, watching the headlights smear through the rain. My reflection looked older somehow. Harder. I spoke without turning. "She's always been loud when she's afraid." He looked at me. "What do you mean?" "When Vanessa loses control, she starts rewriting the script. She's terrified of truth. And what happens when she realizes I'm not on her side anymore?" I faced him fully. "Then she'll come for both of us." He returned to the table and opened another document. The memo again. Highlighted now. She didn't just lie to me. She weaponized me. The more I searched, the less I recognized my own story. The archive terminal buzzed softly beneath my fingertips, its hum blending into the sterile hum of the fluorescent lights above. The room smelled like dust and cold plastic, the kind of space that pretended to be neutral, but knew exactly what it was built to hide. The government didn't keep secrets in basements anymore. They buried them in interfaces, menus, access, denied messages that blinked like polite lies. I hadn't worn my uniform in years, but I still remembered how to maneuver through military databases. The key was knowing what they didn't want you to see. Adam had arranged temporary access under a training pretext. 1 hour, he'd said. No more. It'll ping the wrong people. I was already 30 minutes in, and all I'd found were ghosts. Unit logs had been sliced apart. Officer interviews were time-stamped but missing audio. One file was simply labeled, classified, redacted by civilian request. The hell I opened the metadata. The civilian ID was masked, but the access location pinged back to Virginia. Fairfax County. Shaw Territory. I leaned back, jaw clenched. My fingers flew over the keyboard as I opened a secure chat with Jared. Natalie, need a trace. Redacted file, civilian override. Location, cause, Fairfax. Jared on it. Jared, give me 10 minutes. Maybe 15. You owe me more coffee. Natalie. Deal. I kept digging. The deeper I went, the more I saw the marks of someone deliberately rewriting a narrative, my narrative. After-action reports had edits made weeks after they were filed. Performance evaluations were stripped of context. A disciplinary notice I had never seen appeared in my record dated the same day I'd been medevaced. Then a notification popped up. File recovered partial audio. I clicked it. The screen flickered. The voice was faint but familiar. Lolita Cole was the calmest presence I've seen under fire. She stabilized the injured. She ordered us back. We wouldn't have made it without her. A medic. One of ours. The file ended abruptly. No name. No ID tag. Just static. I stared at the screen. Someone had intentionally deleted this someone who had access to override a military record. My stomach twisted. Jared's reply blinked into view. Jared's civilian login tied to Shaw Family Foundation. Jared multiple overrides between 2018-2020. All tagged expedited request. That's unusual. Jared Vanessa didn't do this alone. I stood up. The air felt tighter than before. The Shaw Foundation had many faces. Vanessa's name was front and center, sure, but the funding came from higher up. Their board, their connections, the ones who whispered behind closed doors. Rebecca. I remembered her voice from childhood. Cold. Exact. Ruthless in the way that silk could be a weapon if tied tight enough. She never raised it. She never had to. If Vanessa had the ambition, Rebecca had the access. Another file caught my eye, a scrubbed interview summary. It wasn't even redacted. It had simply vanished from the official report. I recovered what little I could, a note from a unit psychologist who had logged a formal disagreement with my discharge classification. No signs of delusion, assertive but rational, fit for command, never included in the tribunal hearing. I clicked open the case summary from the day I was removed. The usual signatures appeared. Military brass, external advisors, and one unfamiliar name, Civilian Liaison R. Shaw. I blinked. She hadn't even hidden it. Had she sat there behind a polished table, behind polite glasses and a neutral expression, while I was stripped of everything I downloaded, every scrap I could find, zipped them into a drive, and slid it into the pocket of my coat. When I shut the terminal down, the screen went dark with a final beep. My own face reflected faintly in the monitor. I didn't recognize her either. As I left the building, I muttered, "They had proof. and they buried it. Vanessa called. Family dinner this Sunday. Don't be late, Mom insists. The call had come like a command, not a request clipped saccharine and rigid beneath the syrupy tone. As if no war had ever happened, no exile issued. Just a typical Sunday at the Shaws. I let her voice echo on speakerphone while I stared out the window of my apartment, the late summer haze softening the edges of the buildings like a mirage. She hung up before I responded. I hadn't been to one of those dinners in years. The last one had ended with Rebecca announcing with perfect diction and a crystal flute in hand that the family trust was no longer obligated to support someone who had disgraced the uniform. The room had clinked glasses. I had walked out alone. But this time, I wasn't walking in empty-handed. By the time Sunday came, I had reconstructed enough of my story to make even Rebecca twitch. Not all the pieces, but enough. Enough to slip a wedge beneath their polished surface. Enough to make them squirm. The Shaw estate hadn't changed. The dining hall gleamed with curated opulence, walnut paneling oil portraits of long-dead men who had inherited greatness rather than earned it. The long table glittered with silverware so polished it reflected the chandeliers like little suns. Every detail whispered wealth and control. Vanessa greeted me with arms outstretched and a gleaming smile as if we were some Hallmark family in reconciliation. Natalie, look at you. So practical. Her eyes dragged down my simple navy sheath dress, a quiet jab at the absence of designer logos. I returned the smile with the same icy precision she wielded. Well, not all of us have stylists on retainer. Rebecca stood at the far end of the table, her gaze sharper than the steak knives. She didn't speak right away, just studied me with that lawyer's stillness she'd perfected over decades. Cool appraisal masquerading as maternal regard. I see you've opted for a civilian look, she finally said. Refreshing. I took my seat without breaking eye contact. I left the camouflage at home. Didn't want to blend into the drapes. Light laughter fluttered around the table, distant cousins, family friends, the usual satellites of the Shaw orbit. They chuckled because it was expected, not because it was funny. Adam sat beside Vanessa, his tie, tight shoulders stiff. He hadn't looked at me once since I walked in. But I could feel it, the tension rolling off him like heat from a stovetop. Under the table, his hand stayed clenched around his wine glass, knuckles white. We'd agreed not to tip our hand tonight. Not yet. Vanessa launched into conversation like a game show host, anecdotes about fundraisers, upcoming events, her latest charity gala. All sparkle, no substance. She dominated the table, her voice rising and falling with performative ease. I listened. I watched. Rebecca's comments were sparing, but when she did speak, people leaned in. She didn't need to say much, her authority lay in the silence that followed. Then came dessert. The moment the brandy was poured and plates clinked with tiny forks, I leaned back in my chair and asked it. Anyone remember? Lieutenant McAllister. The name fell into the room like a dropped fork. Vanessa blinked. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Beside her, Adam's head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing. From the far end of the table, Rebecca's voice cut through. He died years ago. Irrelevant. No one else moved. I swirled the brandy in my glass. Interesting. I didn't say he was dead. That night, someone broke into my garage and left only one thing, a USB stick. Empty. I found it on my workbench beside a tipped-over can of WD-40. No signs of theft. No smashed windows. Just the stick, shiny, harmless, looking like an exclamation mark to a threat left unspoken. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to. The message was clear. I sat in my car with the engine off, the garage door still open, heart pounding. My training screamed to document, to report, to preserve the scene. But the voice in my head, the one Vanessa spent years trying to bury, said this was no mistake. This was personal. Grace picked up on the first ring. Someone was in my garage. You sure? They left me a USB drive, empty. She didn't ask more, just said, "You're not paranoid. You're marked." By morning, I'd scrubbed my hard drive 3 times and packed my laptop in a Faraday bag. I wasn't naive enough to believe it made a difference, but I had to do anything to pretend I was still in control. We met at a public legal office in Arlington. Grace had insisted on it: neutral ground, high foot traffic, no electronic trail. The waiting room buzzed with low murmurs and stale coffee. I hadn't slept. "You look like hell," she said. "I'm being followed," I replied. "Or watched. Or both." Grace didn't blink. "They're making it loud on purpose. To shake you." It was working. I pulled out my phone to show her the email I'd drafted: a carefully worded request to reopen my military tribunal case, but the screen flickered strangely. My email app wouldn't load. Grace frowned. "When did you send this?" "Last night, before the break-in." She took the phone, opened a diagnostic tool, and tapped quickly. "You didn't send it," she said. "It never left your outbox. The transmission was intercepted before it hit the Army's servers." I stared at her. "How?" "You tell me. Who else has the resources and the motive?" "Rebecca." It was no longer theory. No longer Vanessa pulling strings out of petty spite. This was strategic, surgical, civilian influence wrapped in national machinery. "Let's talk to Marcus," Grace said. He was a cybersecurity expert she'd used in past whistleblower cases. Tall, tired eyes lived in hoodies. Marcus took one look at the USB stick I'd sealed in a bag and said, "This isn't about data. It's a signature." "A warning?" I asked. "No," he said. "A branding?" I sat back. Every inch of me wanted to scream, but the silence inside me was louder than any outburst. "She's closing doors before you can knock," Grace said. "And she's been doing it for years." I didn't answer. Later, we sat on a bench outside the courthouse. I watched a man in a gray coat stand across the street for too long. He never approached, never turned his head, just waited, and left. I was unraveling. The truth was heavy. The lies were heavier. Rebecca had always operated in shadows under the guise of refinement and civic duty. She never screamed. She whispered policies into the ears of men with power. I thought about quitting, about disappearing again, changing my name, moving somewhere the Shaw name had no reach. But then Grace handed me the folder. A single redacted military audit. And beneath layers of blackout ink, one name remained legible: Rebecca Shaw, Strategic Civilian Influence Committee. I looked at her. It was never just Vanessa. It was her. It was always her. I didn't need justice. I needed the truth to scream louder than their lies. The underground cafe smelled of burnt espresso and secrets. It was one of those unlisted places with no sign on the door, just a keypad and a flickering security camera. I waited in the back corner near the humming server rack that powered anonymity for whistleblowers from DC to Geneva. My phone buzzed once. Jared. I opened the encrypted file as the dull light flickered overhead. It began with static. Then the voice I hadn't heard in 6 years. "Lieutenant McAllister. She's the only reason we made it out of there," he said, voice calm, steady. "Lieutenant Cole." Didn't panic. She didn't shout. She gave us instructions. Clear. Measured. Even while bleeding. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until the clip paused to buffer. My hands trembled. It wasn't just confirmation, it was vindication. Every moment they'd tried to erase now had a voice. And that voice sounded certain, unwavering, and painfully real. I scrolled through the transcript. McAllister had not only defended my competence, he had specifically cited my decision-making under duress, the same decisions they claimed were erratic and compromising. His account contradicted every word in the tribunal summary Vanessa helped fabricate. I forwarded the file to Grace. Within minutes, she messaged back, "This is the anchor. We go public." At Grace's apartment, the rain lashed against the windows like a warning. Inside it was quiet except for the sound of my keyboard. We worked side by side, two women, with nothing left to lose and everything to expose. "I'm filing the complaint to the Office of Military Justice," First Grace said. "They won't ignore McAllister's testimony now that it's time-stamped and authenticated. We include Jared's metadata trail. You okay with that?" "Do it." She clicked send. I looked down at the statement I'd drafted for the press, a cold, factual account. But it didn't bleed. And this time, it had to. Grace pushed a mug of coffee toward me. "Don't write it like a report. Write it like you're testifying in a room where your name still matters." I closed the document and started over. I wrote about Iraq, about what it meant to keep breathing when half your unit didn't, about how silence was a weapon, how lies wore uniforms too. I wrote about Vanessa. I didn't name her directly, not yet, but anyone reading would feel the chill of her presence in the footnotes of my shame. Adam called as I hit save. "I'm going in tomorrow," he said. "Internal review. I've requested to testify unofficially. Off the record for now." "Are you sure?" There was a pause. Then his voice steady but low. "She used me. I believed everything she said about you. I let her rewrite my memory of that mission. I can't undo it. But I can make damn sure no one else pays for it." Grace glanced at me and nodded. "We'll prep you tonight," she mouthed. I closed my eyes for a beat. This was happening. Momentum was shifting. For the first time since that courtroom, I wasn't clinging to survival. I was choosing to fight. Later that night, as Grace folded case files into a fireproof lockbox, I reopened McAllister's interview one last time. Latine Kolish Cole didn't break. She bled for every man there, he said. I hit pause. My fingers hovered above the trackpad. Then I opened my laptop's webcam and stared into the lens. My reflection blinked back, older, harder, but intact. I hit record. "My name is Natalie Cole, former Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army. This is my testimony." I inhaled. Let it settle. "You tried to silence me. You failed." The cursor blinked, waiting. "Your move, Mother." I didn't sit at that tribunal table as a soldier. I sat as their mirror, every lie they told reflected back. The room hadn't changed in 6 years. Same sterile white walls, same seal of the United States Army behind the panel of officers. Same uncomfortable chairs meant to remind you that comfort was a civilian luxury. But I wasn't here to ask for comfort. I was here to return their silence dressed in truth. Grace sat behind me, calm and composed. Adam entered the room quietly, his suit crisp ribbons neatly aligned, a soldier's dignity intact. This time, he was testifying for the right side. Across the long oak table sat 2 senior JAG representatives and a colonel assigned to lead the internal review. None of them looked up when I placed the thick folder in front of them, but they listened when I spoke. Exhibit A, the original discharge report, dated July 3rd, 2018. Psychological instability cited. Diagnosis unconfirmed. The colonel nodded without comment. Exhibit B, recovered interview file. Leoter McAllister, Field Medic. His statement contradicts every claim made about my behavior during the Mosul extraction. A flicker of interest from one of the JAG attorneys. Exhibit C, IP log records showing unauthorized access to my personnel file. The login is traced to a private network belonging to the Shaw family estate. This time, pen scratched paper. Adam stood. His voice was steady, but beneath the calm, I could hear the fracture, the guilt finally being set free. "I served with the Lieutenant Cole in Mosul. I was wounded. She was the one who coordinated our evac under fire. I was told she died shortly after. That she'd lost it. That she put us all at risk." He looked directly at me. But none of that was true. I believed a version of events that was carefully edited and passed through unofficial channels. Today, I correct that record. The colonel turned to me. Do you have any proof regarding who submitted the psychological recommendation? I slid the final page across the table, a scanned PDF time-stamped metadata verified. The header was subtle recommendation for administrative discharge. The signature at the bottom even subtler, Vanessa Shaw. But what caught the colonel's attention was the audit trail, the originating IP address, shaw.estate.secpriv.net. A long pause. Who owns that server? The colonel asked. I didn't hesitate. Rebecca Shaw, civilian, philanthropic board chair, my mother. The room thickened with silence. One JAG officer cleared his throat. Given the civilian nature of that interference, a military tribunal may lack jurisdiction. The colonel stared at the document longer than necessary. Then, finally, I'm recommending this file be escalated to civilian oversight. The conduct merits further inquiry, specifically the role of Ms. Rebecca Shaw. It wasn't a declaration of innocence, not yet. But it was movement. For the first time in 6 years, the needle shifted. The hearing adjourned. Adam stayed back to answer a few procedural questions. Grace touched my elbow, then disappeared into the hallway. I gathered my files slowly, carefully, each one now carrying weight they hadn't the last time I walked out of this place. As the heavy door closed behind me, I saw her. Vanessa, waiting in the corridor like a ghost who never had to knock. Her dress was tailored, her heels too high for the marble floor. She didn't look angry, just offended. You had no right, she said. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because for the first time she looked unsure. And that was enough. For years I dreamed of revenge, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like silence. The Shaw estate was quieter than I'd ever known it. Even the hydrangeas seemed muted, as if they too were ashamed to bloom. Rebecca had vanished upstairs after the dinner, and the press that once adored her had begun to ask inconvenient questions. The morning after, the iron gates bore a new sign: Federal Hold Investigation in Progress. A convoy of plain black cars had arrived just after sunrise. I hadn't called them. I hadn't needed to. The system once bent against me was finally waking up. Grace and I sat in her apartment, a one-bedroom flat smelling of peppermint tea and old secrets. She handed me a manila folder, part of the estate's internal financial disclosures smuggled out before lockdown. The Shaw Family Foundation's accounts were frozen, their entire financial history now under audit. Vanessa's been pulled from 3 military-affiliated boards. Grace murmured, her eyes fixed on the screen. The invitations just vanished. Poetic, I said. Jared pinged me later that afternoon. A series of messages popped up on my encrypted chat. Shaw SVR2 deactivated, Foundation DNS flagged for external probe. More logs coming. I didn't reply. I just stared at the blinking cursor, feeling not relief exactly. More like the loosening of a knot that had lived inside my chest for a decade. By the evening, a dozen emails had come in. Some were reporters asking for quotes. Some were anonymous. But a few names stood out: former colleagues from my command days. Officers who'd watched me fall and said nothing. One stood out, from Lieutenant Mark Devlin. Subject: I was wrong. Message: I read the report. I watched the hearing. I believed what they told me back then. I didn't ask questions. I'm sorry. I closed the message, not because I forgave him, but because I finally didn't need his validation anymore. Grace sat beside me on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest, watching an old episode of some legal drama we both pretended not to enjoy. I thought I'd feel more triumphant, I said softly. You dismantled a dynasty, she replied. Sometimes the echo takes longer to fade. I nodded. We didn't toast. We didn't cry. We just let the silence stretch. A few hours later, as the sun slipped behind the Capitol dome, I returned to my apartment and opened my inbox one last time. Among the flood of headlines and inquiries was one subject line that made me freeze. Subject honorary restoration ceremony. Invitation enclosed. I clicked it open. The message was short. Formal. From the Department of the Army. Ms. Natalie Cole. Following recent developments and independent legal review, we are pleased to invite you to an honorary restoration ceremony recognizing your prior service and sacrifices. Attendance is voluntary. Respectfully, Colin Marcus E. Trenton, Office of Military Justice. No fanfare. No apology. Just a simple door. Quietly unlocked. I stared at the screen for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. Instead, I closed the laptop with steady fingers. Let's finish this. When they called my name this time, no one flinched. No one laughed. The ceremony hall at Arlington was silent reverent. Rows of medals glinted under the chandelier light, catching shadows like breath held too long. I stood near the back, flanked by a pair of veterans I didn't know, but whose eyes told me they did. Somehow, a sea of uniforms, some pressed for the occasion, some frayed with time, faced the dais. Adam was seated to the left, 2 rows back, his posture erect, hands clenched together. Grace leaned against a far wall near the exit, arms crossed. Jared, in an ill-fitting jacket, looked down at his phone, pretending not to be moved. They'd called 20 names already. Service members reinstated posthumously, others too sick to attend. I was next. The living proof. My boots didn't click on the marble like they used to, but every step felt like steel returning to my spine. A general took the podium. Tall, silver-haired, voice clear and unhurried. Lieutenant Colonel Natalie Cole, he announced, served with distinction under conditions no soldier should have had to endure. Her conduct in Iraq saved lives. Her discharge was not only improper, it was unjust. The words landed without protest. No one in that room could deny it anymore. She didn't betray her uniform, he said, pausing. Her uniform betrayed her. Something inside me cracked. Not loud. Not painful. Just the quiet collapse of a weight I didn't know I still carried. I stepped forward, stopping at the center mark. The general reached into a velvet box and lifted out a freshly minted brass insignia. It gleamed like it knew the whole story. My breath trembled as he pinned it to my lapel. Lieutenant Colonel Natalie Cole, he said, his voice softer now. With honors. A subtle murmur ran through the room, respectful, restrained. But it echoed louder than any applause. They handed me the framed certificate next. My name typed clean and centered beneath an official seal I once believed would never stand beside me again. I turned to face the audience. Adam stood. No smile. Just a steady nod. His eyes were wet, but he didn't blink them away. Grace mouthed something across the space between us. I think it was finally. Jared was crying outright, covering it badly. I didn't cry, but when I shook the general's hand, my fingers trembled. Not from fear, from the knowledge that I'd rebuilt myself piece by shattered piece and finally stepped out from beneath the rubble. As the ceremony closed, the crowd began to file out slowly. Some stopped to nod. Others said nothing but looked at me with the kind of silence that matters. I walked toward the side doors, the marble cool beneath my heels. Adam was waiting there, one shoulder against the wall, a half smile tugging at his face. Ready for what's next? I never got an apology, but I got something better. The truth unshackled. The letter came on a Monday. Cream cardstock again, the seal from the Department of the Army embossed at the top. No cursive this time, just clean print and a signature from someone I'd never met. Still, the memory returned like the tide. I hadn't seen that handwriting in 4 years. Only now it didn't matter. Inside was a formal notice. All disciplinary records related to Lieutenant Colonel Natalie Cole have been expunged. Her commendations have been restored, and her service record made public with full honors. Below it, a line in smaller font, Thank you for your service. I folded the letter and set it beside me on the bench, the wood cool from shade. The old harbor stretched out before me, docks long since replaced the training grounds empty. I used to run drills here, bark orders into the wind. Today, there was only the sound of seagulls and the soft slap of waves against concrete. Grace arrived with 2 coffees and a clipboard. She sat beside me without speaking for a while, then passed over a folder with the header, Veteran Advocacy Initiative Female Unit ZO 4. Inside were outlines, proposed funding leads, a mission statement half-drafted in her hurried handwriting. We could help others like us, she said, ones who didn't get their ceremonies, or their names back. I nodded. But this time we lead the mission. She smiled. This time, no one gets silenced. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I let it ring twice before picking up. Are you near the ocean? Adam asked. I could hear the echo of wind in his headset. I'm at the old docks. Figures. He chuckled softly. You always did like dramatic send-offs. I pictured him in transit, already some terminal between here and Brussels where he'd been reassigned. We had said our goodbyes the night before. No promises, no declarations, just mutual understanding. Some truths are best left unburdened. You'll do good over there, I said, and you'll do good right here. We didn't say goodbye. We just let the line fall quiet, then clicked off. Sometimes that's enough. Later that afternoon, Grace showed me a news bulletin, Rebecca Shaw under formal inquiry for ethics violations. No photo, no comment, no rebuttal. That was her answer. Silence. Not defiant, not pleading. Just gone. The sun dipped low. I stood and walked toward the edge of the pier. The wind lifted my jacket, and for the first time in years I felt light, not in the absence of weight, but in the choosing to set it down. I wore no uniform, no medals, just myself. The truth unshackled. I looked out toward the horizon, the sky streaked with fading pink. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time I didn't need to. I smiled, turned from the water, and walked forward. Let them write their stories. I'll live mine. They buried my truth under forged reports and family legacies, thinking silence would be my surrender. But justice has a way of rising slow, steady, and deafening once it arrives. I didn't need their apologies. I needed the world to see that even a name smeared in shadows can become a beacon. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story struck something in you, like, share and leave a comment, press 1 if you felt seen, 2 if you believe there's more to say.